just to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm sure people will kind of continue to log on, obviously, as the webinar goes. But thank you everyone for joining. My name is Megan Elwood. I am the Business Development Manager with Strategies Group. And this is, goodness, I think part 3 or 4 of our series that we've been doing in partnership with ASA. And today we've actually added on an additional partner, which you will also be hearing from, which is American Global. So with that being said, you'll be hearing from 3 different people today. They're all extremely interactive, so no one will get bored, I can promise you that. So the first person you'll be hearing from is Pat Chappell. Pat actually started his career in real estate and construction, and he actually founded Strategies Group in 1984. As one of the very first Timberline, now Sage partners, and additional partnerships with Dexter and Cheney, Viewpoint, and Acumatica, Strategies Group as a whole has assisted well over 2,000 construction-focused companies to help find solutions and to help them increase their bottom lines and build equity in their business. You will also be hearing from Jennifer Westmoreland, and who's the president of American Global Georgia, as well as Greg West, who is the senior vice president of American Global Georgia. And just a quick little background of who American Global is. They are a privately held, construction-focused insurance and surety broker, and they deliver strategic values to contractors, developers. They have well over 100 employees all across, the United States. I think they have an office in London. So they are going to be our experts here in terms of minimizing construction risk, which is why we have asked them to join us, and they have agreed to. So with that being said, I will hand it over to Pat Chappell, let him get us started. And if anyone has any questions, obviously, I'm sure this is not everyone's first webinar, so throw it in the Q&A. Yeah, we'll get started. Pat, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Megan, and hello, everybody. Welcome to another Lunch and Learn. This is, I think, actually, it's the fourth in a series of webinars we've had the privilege of doing with ASA. We're going to do a little bit of background just to get started and talk about some of the things that our subcontractors see and what some of their issues are. And so we'll get started right away. I think this will sort of be a building approach on some of the things that you all have seen before. Actually, just to get started, Megan did mention that we've got quite a few clients, and we're also a fairly large company now in our space, which is construction-focused companies and ERP solutions for those. Originally started around the construction AE, developer, and field service, but now we're getting more and more because of the way the market's changed into all kinds of manufacturing and distribution around the construction marketplace. So I kind of like to go back to this slide because it's kind of interesting to me. It's a factoid that you can use at your next beer hall conversation with your peers. But the oldest company in the world, formal company in the world, is a Japanese company called Kongo Gumi that started about 1,400 years ago. They're still in business. And what we found is that no matter when or no matter what, the issues that we face in construction are pretty much dictated by the economy. We've already had some webinars on finding and securing profitable work, making more on the work you get, finding and keeping the best talent, which was our last meeting. And then today we're going to be talking about managing and reducing risk. And that's a really broad topic. And I'm going to let the good folks at American Global go into that in a little more detail. We could basically have multiple conversations and multiple webinars on this. So just want to introduce some general concepts and some maybe driving concepts to why that really needs to be top of mind with you. We'll also be doing some work on reducing overhead and infrastructure costs and maintaining client relationships. And then, of course, in the subcontractor world, there's in many cases a much bigger opportunity to create ongoing revenue streams, which we can talk about in future webinars. So this is kind of a scary thing. We've talked about this before, but still over 30% of projects, at least going back to 2020, don't have a repeatable baseline, meaning people don't have a plan. Or if they do, it's not very well constructed. So Managing risk is pretty much everything we do, from hiring employees to underbidding jobs that we have to do to, you name it. And we hope that this is not a familiar problem for you or a familiar thought in your own business. If it is, though, we sure hope you'll pay attention and do some things that can help you manage this risk. When we talk about the challenges, we know what we do is hard. Labor's been an issue. We've been talking about that a lot. Obviously now with the supply chain to where things are, it's very difficult to source materials and get it delivered on time. So we know that's a problem. I think that sometimes we get in our own way when we think about every job as a work of art. It always is site-specific things, new methods of construction may in fact make it a work of art, but I think there's a lot more we can do to make a hamburger like McDonald's does so that the hamburger's the same everywhere. And if we can look at ways to build formal processes and best practices, we can get away from that work of art thing, but still keep the special sauce, right, that makes our businesses different. When we don't understand our costs, overhead, other G&A expenses, job costs, we've got a whole nother level of risk. We're going to talk about that today. Track to run on, a lot of times we don't have standard procedures that leverage those best practices, and Greg and Jennifer are going to talk about why that's important. Often we do have some procedures in existence, but maybe they're manual and they take too much people power. Maybe we have older systems that really don't allow us to get to that information in an easy way, right? And it's one thing to be able to do something, it's totally another thing to be able to do it easily. So we'll show you a little bit right at the end about how maybe that can help. This is kind of interesting, and it's a continuing problem with communication to the field and the office. Oftentimes we find things when it's too late to fix it. And because we have so many different systems out there, even now the average project manager has 8 construction applications on their phone. And a lot of times the finance people don't even know they have them. So these are all areas of risk for us. How do we deal with that? This again is a recoup of things we've talked about before. We think it's really important for you to go back on an ongoing basis and do a post-mortem on 3 projects. And, let's talk about it. How did we secure the work? What risk management issues did we experience? What was the impact? Because if we don't learn from the past, we're going to keep repeating the same thing. Around that, we have to know our directs and indirects. We have to know what our gross and net margins are. I know this is construction 101, but it's like golf. You got to set up you got to set yourself up in a position to hit a successful shot by repeating your process, by doing what's the best practices and all that kind of stuff in order to hit a good shot. Or same thing with fishing. You need to know where to go, right? So, and at the end of the day, this is a really big question, because now your GCs are more and more wanting to know whether they want to work with you. So, do you want to work with them? Do they want to work with you? How do you get to the top of the list as a subcontractor and get to work with the people, the owners that you like, that make it worth it? So what's the blueprint? Well, obviously we've got our pre-construction phases where we define our ideal jobs, where we find the work, and then where we estimate for profit. And I mean that. We really need to know what our profit's going to be. The only way to know about that is to look at work we've been successful with before. It's really interesting to see that sometimes you might think a job didn't do that well, when in fact it did much better than things you think do well that really don't in the end. But it's comfortable, it's work you've done. You get to make a decision about whether you want to pursue more profitable work or stay where you are. That's a choice. It should be a choice. During the whole construction and post-construction process, we've got to plan that work out. We've got to manage the risk and perform it. We've got to analyze what we've done, and then we have to repeat. It's really pretty simple, that it's easy to gloss over all these things, and we've drilled down into each one of these different parts over the last several months. And today we're going to do it on risk. I just want you to know there are tools for this. And we're very bullish now on the tools that have been built for the cloud, not just run on the cloud. There's lots of old really good software that's very mature, that does a lot of really good stuff, but it's mostly report based. So if you need to find something, you have to go dig for it. The modern solutions are much more proactive. They present data that's more recent, or maybe almost even real time. So we're trying to help our clients move from being, reactive to proactive. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now, and I have the pleasure of turning this over to Jennifer and Greg. So I'll let you all take it away.
Yes, thank you, Pat and Megan. Really appreciate you all and ASA for allowing us to participate in today's chapter meeting. My name is Jennifer Westmoreland. I lead American Global's Georgia office. A little bit of background Megan gave at the beginning, but our company specializes in all facets of risk management for the construction industry, with a particular focus around insurance and surety solutions for contractors. Events like these are really meaningful for us. We're both students and stewards of the industry. So, I say that with pride and conviction because as a boutique agency, we're not generalists, nor do we engage in other business segments. Our business model is 100% solely focused on construction. Along with our 7 other offices, including an office in the UK, connected to the London market, we're one of the fastest growing and presently among the largest construction-focused brokerages in the country. And further distinguishing our approach to the business and our depth of team members include experts from civil engineering, project finance, construction law, CPAs, and claims that help to really advance our brand and act as an extension to our clients' business models in many ways beyond just pure risk management. And with that, I'm actually going to kick it over to my counterpart, Greg West, to start our presentation for today.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, Pat and Megan. Appreciate the opportunity to speak before the ASA group. I'll start off by saying that while I'm thankful, grateful to be involved in an industry that is essential and flourishing like construction, the general uncertainties in today's climate brings an even greater importance awareness to risk management as an integral part of a contractor's business model. Certainly, construction is a bellwether for the economy, but in the same vein, it also lags the economic cycle. This post-COVID recovery, however we define it, is one that forebodes a lot of risk in the construction industry. So the same force is creating competition and all the supply chain risk and price variability that maybe you all are dealing with or looking at, certainly has weakened and will continue to weaken many in the industry, with subcontractors particularly hit hard. So the point is, wise owners are asking more and more questions these days about how a general contractor intends to pre-qualify, de-scope, select, manage, and close out subs. The current market, therefore, is taking greater due diligence in hiring the subcontractor suppliers and vendors that they relied on in past years. Beyond operational core competencies, it's imperative for subs to better manage risk tolerance and to prove their financial insurance resources to construction managers and GCs to justify retaining them on future projects. So we know that contractors take on a lot of risk every day, and Jennifer and I could be here for days discussing just that. Maybe employee risk, safety risk, insurance risk, or contractual risk, just to name a few. For today's discussion, we're primarily focused, as Pat alluded to, primarily on high-level insurance and contractual risk concepts. We want to foster a lot of thought from the audience and certainly have a lot of Q&A on the back end. But first and foremost, your contract risk is different than your insurance risk. I'll repeat that. Your contract risk is different than your insurance risk. Just because the contract requires you to place certain insurance policies does not mean that any insurance policy you put in place is automatically compliant with that contract or even provides in your best interest. And I'll couple that with, regardless of risk transfer or insurance product a contractor employs to hedge against loss, there are things one should do to actively manage your project from pre-con to post-substantial completion. and certainly in order to distinguish yourself in the eyes of a GC and owner. Certainly starts with strong internal risk management procedures around project go, no go. Pat alluded to the ever-evolving technological advances that help contractors in this realm. BIM, QA/QC, procurement procedures. Little things mean a lot in terms of active management versus passive reporting. So, obtaining personal indemnity, reference checks, supplier vendor checks, balances at the project level, ensuring the schedule value payments that are correct, close monitoring on that realm. And finally, coming to terms with the contractual liability that comes with your subcontract agreement. To determine this, it starts with that careful review of the contract and partnering with a strong construction resource, be it a construction-focused attorney, be it a tech firm like Strategies Group, risk management advisor broker like us, as well as the CPA community. So make sure we're getting up to the next slide.
1 second. Is that getting any better with our audio, or is it continuing to fade out?
That sounds good right there.
Okay, so maybe just speak. Yeah.
Yep. Apologize, folks.
No, you're good.
We're caught up here. So in this diagram, it's pretty self-evident. The entire group's probably seen this food chain, but construction contractual relationships are best illustrated as a tiered structure, with the hiring party solidified as the upstream entity, leaving the subcontractors with really no direct contractual relationship. So absent any direct privity of contract, it's not hard to imagine downstream contractual structures and incentives that are misaligned at best and at worst a trap. So many construction contracts are drafted, or standard versions, AIA, consensus docs, AGCs, are modified based on that GC by professionals, and sometimes with folks with little knowledge of insurance coverage in general. So as a result, it's not unusual for contracts to shift liabilities to the contractor that are extremely difficult or costly to insure or even uninsurable. The end result is that risks are often passed to the other areas of the value chain instead of being addressed. And, as in all facets of business, there are players who make money from claims rather than from good project delivery. This doesn't even take into account the pain of legal ramifications, which nobody wants. And oh, by the way, the state of Georgia just recently made the number 6 on the annual judicial hellhole listing. So, bottom line, the goal of risk transfer should be to allocate risk to the party that is in the best position to control, manage, and finance the risk. And to put it into current context with the AEC world, the bigger firms will almost certainly get bigger. The more diverse firms will continue to procure the best work. They have the most resources to pay the more experienced and higher skilled workers. They're able to take advantage of capital and expand the use of more efficient and profitable technology. And given the variability in the construction cycle, larger firms may aggressively be bidding on mid-sized projects they had typically avoided over the past 5 to 7 years. So this heightened level of competition will force the mid-sized and smaller contractors to compete that much harder for projects that were already difficult to win, as we all know. So bottom line, I'll hand the baton back to Jennifer, but subcontractors who have a greater understanding of contractual risk transfer strategies and real or perceived business and operational risks. I mentioned the shortage of labor, supply chain, QA/QC, material escalation. All that not only enhances their risk profile in the minds of a GC and owner, but offers them up greater negotiating power, leading to greater profit margins and reducing the dreaded profit fade on a job. Back to you, Jennifer.
Okay, and I know it sounds like we're still having a little bit of audio issues, fading in and out. So I'm going to try and see if this helps at all, but let me know if, again, we're still not, if it's still kind of fading in and out or not.
Okay, will do. I
You
gotcha.
can hear, but this is okay. You can hear right now.
Yeah, I can hear so far. I can.
Can everybody else, real quick, or somebody respond in the chat? I think if you were having trouble, can you let me know if you can hear better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. You're
Perfect. Right. So thank you. Sorry about that. So really going into, this next slide is, that the reality is, going back to, Greg's point, is that unfortunately, a lot of contractors often accept the onerous and contractual provisions put forth without complaint, particularly when the business climate is really competitive. So in addition to potentially putting, yourself in breach of contract with regard to insurance requirements, or, this just kind of across the board acceptance of risk exposes, contractors to potentially catastrophic losses. Most never experience that loss, but it can and does happen. So it's important to really make sure construction specific resources and consultants that can really help, construction clients avoid that unfortunate costly situation. Circling around to this is that there's numerous subcontract agreement templates that are out there. And don't take for granted that just because these subcontracts have a stamp of approval by various organizations, that they're all within your best interest, or they haven't been modified by an upstream party. Each version can include various provisions that may or may not be in your benefit. So it's important to really go through and review, in particular key areas, but the overall language that's being utilized. So without putting everyone to sleep immediately, there's a few key areas of focus on that are of particular concern for contractors. One of the most important ones being hold harmless or indemnification or additional insured language that's being requested. So this involves the transfer of one party's liability to another. In the simplest of terms, every contractor would be responsible for their own work, and that's it. But often, broader terms are utilized and included that can make you responsible for anything that happens on the job site, whether it's your fault or not. Many states have laws prohibiting the specific type of indemnification language, but contract holders can use varying levels of additional insured status that can get at that indemnification language and allow other parties protection underneath your policy, or allow them to utilize your limits before their own. So again, it's just important to understand what you're signing up for and if it's something you're willing to accept or not. So again, what's being passed along to you and what do those risks mean? Other examples can be what insurance requirements, what limits and types of insurance coverage is being required. Another one outside of the insurance space, but is dispute resolution. Does the contract allow for good faith discussions before notice going to the identified, so to speak, decision maker? Are you able to select a neutral dispute review board before things go to binding mediation? Who's required to pay for those legal costs? There can also be lack of force majeure clauses in there, or consequential liquidated damages or performance guarantees that are being included. So again, it's really important to identify which ones pose a greater risk than others. And then not only have you identifying them, but how do you then price for that risk that is either being transferred to you, and when do you step away from it? Many successful contractors are well versed in estimating the tangible costs of a project, but when it comes to risk, it's often only insurance premiums that are included. Many times the field staff or business development team may have limited risk management backgrounds, or if you have a dedicated risk manager or HR team member, they may have limited field experience. It's important for these, to come together, and having a coordinated, consistently applied business plan creates alignment between the field and office teams and can really bring a distinguishing touch when negotiating with GCs or other contractors. This also allows you to make an educated decision and really best identify which projects you decide to pursue and which ones you may decide you want to pass on. And then not only properly allocating the costs to those jobs. We've often seen that the cost of insurance or risk retention is merely included in the overhead for the company. But if these costs aren't properly allocated to each job, it can cause you to underprice some or overprice others that you could have won. So, again, just there's multiple facets to really consider as we look through this. So, we mentioned the risk transfer piece and, the insurance aspect of the provisions. Not every contractual provision can be insured at the end of the day, though. So identifying what can be insured and what can't be insured. And that could be for a variety of reasons. The coverage may not be widely available in the insurance market overall. An insurance carrier may not provide coverage without a significant retention that may or may not be reasonable for your business model or the cost of this job. Or a carrier has different levels of risk tolerance themselves on what they will provide and what they decide they won't for certain operations. So this is important to recognize, even though there may not be a specific cost for insurance or a requirement within the contract, there's still a cost associated with accepting that risk. And if you can't transfer the risk to your insurance policy or to another tier, then does that put you out of compliance with your contract? A lot of times we merely look at the limits that are requested and confirm the policies we have meet those requirements, thinking that's all we need in order to be compliant. But what about specific language that's being requested too? So we mentioned additional insured and that there's varying levels of language that can be required. So maybe you have additional insured coverage on your policy, but is it the level that's needed? Sorry, I see that we're having more audio issues. So I'm hoping everyone can hear me. One other item. Okay, great. One other thing we mentioned earlier, performance guarantees. Are those required? Those performance guarantees can be, and create potential liabilities that exceed the scope of a typical insurance policy. And that would need to be considered separately as well. So again, kind of circling back here, it's utilizing not just the risk transfer method, but are you retaining? Do you just decide that if you can't be compliant, do you just decide to not pursue the job? Are there safety risks? Again, there's multiple risk management factors that need to be in consideration. So, with that, a couple of, final thoughts for today, for our piece is ultimately, you have to determine your individual tolerance for risk and be prepared to come to the negotiation table with whoever the contract holder is, whether that's the GC or another contractor, with 3 sets of parameters. 1, what's your preferred position on the contract language and the provisions included? 2, what's your fallback position, if not ideal, but acceptable? And 3, what's your list of deal breakers? These are, the provisions that expose your firm to an unacceptable degree of risk, such that you decide you're going to walk away from the project. Clearly, there's many instances where the cost of the liability or the potential liability could far exceed a simple insurance policy. So putting a price tag on that is imperative. Having an established procedure in place that aligns with your core business values and risk tolerance allows you to come to the table to negotiate or price for requirements in ways that don't leave you exposed to unanticipated costs. This also goes for subcontractors that utilize subs themselves. It's important to understand what's being provided to you. Endorsement language, as mentioned here on the screen, can vary significantly between carriers. but also, only obtaining the certificate of insurance may not be, it's not proof of coverage necessarily. So actually getting the endorsements that go along with the coverage and retaining that. And kind of tying into the last comment is that documentation is always key in these instances. Making sure you're tracking and verifying the information and utilizing the consistent business process so that you stay in compliance. And we didn't get into a lot of the details and really the minutia some of this, but it's where, again, partnering with a trusted and advisor on the legal and risk management matters really becomes imperative to your business at the end of the day. So, Greg, I know you wanted to wrap up with a couple of comments as well.
Yeah, no, and I'll apologize for the audio issues earlier, but just hearkening back my macro perspective at the get-go and bringing it home. In today's market, GCs, owners do not only select on price, but overall risk profile of a subcontractor. You all are taking on a lot of risk, known or unbeknownst to you, and my argument, you should be remunerated for that risk. Certainly, subs have more leverage than in the past to negotiate, considering some current market conditions. So, I'll say all those positives with the beware. What's the old saying? The best project is the one you never took. Or from the entire food chain's perspective, everyone's consciously aware of that old adage of contractors die of gluttony and not starvation. So take risks seriously, and greater awareness and understanding can lead to greater success and profits. So with that, we're wrapping it up. We thank the group immensely for the time and happy to take some questions from the broader group.
Yeah, I actually have a few questions, and I will start off with this one. Let's see. Okay, so it says, what would be your suggestion on how to minimize risk using technology?
Oh gosh, I'll take a stab. Jennifer, you can chime in on it.
I'll let everyone can kind of chime in too.
Yeah, it's interesting. From payment application processes to pre-qualification platforms. Golly, you've got QA/QC measurements, document control. A lot of our clients are using Procore, which is an all-in-one type of ecosystem. It's a little bit of a broader ecosystem with all the different technologies, but
I think honestly, Pat, we talked about Acumatica, and there's some. We have a slide here that is next. I think this is a good, actually, follow up to that answer or to that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue there. You're right, Greg. There are a ton of tools out there. That are some that are squarely in the risk management space. There are some that are squarely in the project compliance. There's front ends. When we talk about risk, we can talk about so many things like safety and all the other kinds of things. And so what we've kind of modeled here are some screenshots from a live customer of ours that actually on the controller level has the risk around all the financial and profitability issues, but also has risk around things like change management. And in particular today, if you'd click, we're going to call out here the expired and expiring compliance items. Now, what's interesting about this is that the newer systems, the more modern ones, don't make you resort, if you will, to just running a series of reports. So in this particular case, this widget was set up to go out and based on different types of compliance issues, different criteria, we wanted it to bubble up, if you will, things that are going to come up or have expired. My thought is, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is we shouldn't have to wait till something's expired to find it out, and we shouldn't have to run reports every day just to find it. If we can teach the software, if you will, to show us the information. So theoretically, since we've passed the dates here for July and June, I probably would have addressed those a lot earlier, but just to kind of craft a point there. And if you'll just click the next thing, what we've done is we've kind of drilled down, if you will, from that widget on my homepage as the controller. There's a homepage for a project manager. There's a homepage for the owner. There's a homepage for the AR and AP clerks. I mean, you name it, you can have your own homepage. But in this particular case, we've drilled down to the next level. And there you can see the different types of compliance management that the more modern systems offer. Back in the day when we were doing mostly Sage and Timberline and Viewpoint, some of the other ones that we've handled, compliance was pretty much around whether somebody had a valid certificate so we could pay an AP bill, or you had to make sure that somebody had an affidavit of wages paid on a certified or Davis-Bacon job. Those were all really specific to just the construction aspects. But here we're looking at a whole lot of other things. We've got different types of certificates we can track. We have a bucket for insurance policies. We may have other notifications that we want to track. Obviously, there's the whole lien waiver process. We might have other documents that we want to look at that are around things like, well, maybe I need to have a reprice conversation with my primary suppliers on a quarterly basis. I mean, all of those are, if you want to think about them in a different way, are compliance items. If I'm overpaying for my material because I'm not remembering to negotiate, then I'm in a situation where I'm putting my company at risk of not having the lowest prices. So we can go on and on forever, but just to show you one other thing, I'm calling out Hilti here, just so you'll know that I actually have the ability to actually include the images, the actual artifacts. If this had been an accord form for a general liability certificate, that could be stored. So the idea here is that if you're going to be proactive about things, maybe you want to be warned 60 days before an expiration of a general liability coverage, be able to call that old form up, and while you're sitting there, email it directly to your insurance provider or to your subcontractor or your sub or your supplier, so that instead of waiting for the other shoe to fall, you have a way to get in front of that type of information. And now you're being more proactive, you're more in control of your business. That's the kind of information that we're seeing that the new systems are offering, that some of the old ones don't. As mature as they are, they just weren't built to generate this information proactively. They're more of an older, they're older technology, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just is what it is. So there's a million ways to look at this from a compliance standpoint, but I think that might give you an idea of how you can get in front of things in a much more dynamic way than just just being a slave to oh gosh, I can't pay that invoice now because the guy doesn't have a valid COI. So that's just a sample of some of the things that you can do. And I think we're going to go on to sort of our recap and maybe some other questions from here.
Yep. So I have a couple of other questions. One of them, and I think this is something we also tend to get in the field a little bit too, that, I've heard from people, and it's how do we address the balance between risk acceptance and job costing?
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. And I mean, it's a very, fine balance, I would say, and kind of goes back to one of the comments we talked about, which is determining your tolerance, for risk, and really having that consistent business practice in mind, or process, should I say, of saying, what are you willing to take on, and what are you not willing to? And what is that deal breaker going to be? But then also working through what you are taking on, how do you build that into your bid? end of the day, if you're taking on risk, it's being transferred to you, and you're expected to perform with that risk. You're not able to pass it along, either transfer it to another party, and you personally have to retain it. You should be able to build that into your bid. It's part of the job cost itself. Now, determining what that cost is specifically is going to vary, depending on exactly what you're accepting, what you're retaining, and what, if you're able to insure it, what's the cost to insure it. So that one's a little bit more straightforward when you have an insurance premium or a charge that comes directly from the carrier that you can build in. Where it becomes a little bit more complex is the one that doesn't have a tangible insurance cost associated to it. So what are you, again, retaining that you're not able to pass along, but not also able to specifically insure? And again, that could be one of the items we mentioned, the performance guarantee. So you're, essentially asked that you're responsible, say, for the heating and air cost if it goes over a certain dollar amount annually. What does that mean for you, in that situation? And how do you determine a price associated with adhering or taking on that performance guarantee? So again, it's not able to necessarily provide a specific answer in this, as it will depend on the significant or the specific situation. But that's where it's working closely with a risk management advisor to help walk through, those scenarios with you. And then again, on the legal side, help to be able to build it in to your bid on the front end.
And it changes by location, type of work.
What's
a drywall
location?
Subcontractor's scope of work is different for a medical facility than it is for a Amazon warehouse. There's a lot of variability in terms of properly quantifying the total cost of risk.
I think the biggest thing to come back to, and we've touched on it a couple of times, is just having that established procedure in place, that you recognize and you can make an educated decision on what you are going to accept, and then being able to work through what that cost is associated with it. And so I think that's kind of the ultimate point in that regard. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And, it's funny because we always say, like, at the beginning of this, we were like, and whenever we were putting this whole thing together, it's, this is something that we could elaborate and really go on multiple different, avenues. So this is just a very, very high level, and so we really kind of wanted to keep everything very 30,000 foot view. But selfishly, I would love to do something like this again and maybe do something in person, kind of diving a little bit deeper down into risk and all of that, because I know there is a lot there that, really could be covered. But with that, we don't have any more questions.
Megan?
Go for it,
Megan,
Pat.
this is Pat. I just want to give one other perspective and maybe to reinforce more what Jennifer and Greg have talked about. But we're talking about lots of new software that's out there. And of course, that's what we do. So we see it all the time. But I just want to really emphasize how important this is for our good friends that are subcontractors and ASA members. Because I'll tell you, one of the growth areas right now in construction software, and I see it a lot in the multifamily, a lot from the large developers, a lot from the bigger GCs, where they actually are developing software that helps them evaluate you.
Yes.
And it's more than just your on-time performance. It's more than your change order management. It's more than your the way that you operate on the job site. That's all certainly at the end of the day critical, but they're also looking at their risk. They don't want that bond to come in because their subcontractors, can't perform or leave a job for some reason or the other. They don't want that. So, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'm in those rooms with owners and developers a lot now. They look like me. They're thinking about their, how they're getting out of the business and how they're exiting. And one of the things we talk about a lot now is how do I find the good subs? What software is out there to help me find the people that fit my risk profile? So if you can use that, if you can define your process, your own best practices, that should be part of your marketing. And you should go after, you should make sure that if your competition isn't doing that and you're leading with it, then you're going to have an advantage. So I think this is really, really critical. And forgive me if I sound like I'm lecturing, but it's one of those things that I see all the time now. And, some vendors are actually going out and building systems for that. I mean, they're wrapping it all up. And they're also doing that in some other areas, but it's very critical. And I just hope that, if you like at least the general terms of what we've done today, maybe we can have some more, in-depth conversation around risk from government, risk from, what your employees represent risk to you as well. If somebody's not happy, that's a whole nother level of risk. We got all kinds of things that we need to worry about now, which I hate to worry about, but, just something to think about, and to maybe, when you all are sitting together with your senior leadership, let's talk about how can we come up with a game plan for ourselves that shows how we can make us easier to hire. And at the end of the day, that should go a long way to helping you, meet your own internal goals. So sorry for the preaching, but just something that I see a lot of.
No, Pat, I mean, we couldn't agree with you more on that. And I think Greg made a comment. It's, it's not, well, yes, price is an important piece, not naive to think that, the bid that's put forth, that's not considered, but the overall risk profile of a subcontractor is being analyzed more and more. So it's creating that competitive advantage, for you over others, and making sure, again, you can keep that cost down overall, and keep that bid as low as possible, and managing your risk goes a long way in facilitating that. So, again, reputational risk, like everything across the board. So like you and Megan both said, there's so much we could go into trying to kind of keep this, within the, keep everybody's attention for, and not getting so in depth right away, but there's a lot of content here that you could really dig into.
Yeah, absolutely. And really just to reiterate, so we will be sharing all of this. We will be sending out a recording of everything. And also too, feel free, reach out to any of us at Strategies Group, any of, Jennifer, Greg, or anybody at American Global, and also too, if you happen to come to an ABC event, you will definitely see myself and Jennifer and Greg there. So just a little plug. So if you kind of want to get a 2-for-1 special, you can come see both of us.
Sure.
But yeah, other than that, if nobody has any other questions, we will wrap it up. And yeah, thank you guys so much. And thank you, Jennifer and Greg. Thank you so very much for the insight.
No, thank you for having us. We really appreciate, being a part of this and for everyone's time today. So again, any questions, like Megan said, we're happy to help with whatever we can. So
absolutely.
Again, just thank you for having us a part of it.
Awesome. Well, everyone have a great rest of the day, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.